Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Brittany Unfiltered. Happy Tuesday to all of you. I hope your week started off very, very strong. I do have one big topic that I wanted to kind of focus on today, but before I do that, we're going to see how this podcast goes. It might be a little bit shorter than normal. I'm not sure. We'll see how much of it I actually can get through. I hesitated to bring this topic up. I kind of was in a war with myself over whether or not to talk about it because it is very personal and because it's something that I think typically isn't talked about very much, but that's kind of why I wanted to and why I think it's important. And that is just the fact that at a very basic level, this has been one of those days where pregnancy has just completely kicked my butt. Absolutely kicked my butt. It has been a really exhausting day. It's been one of those days where I just feel like I'm in a mental fog all the time. Like I kind of can't seem to completely wake up. And this does, I mean, it happens every so often. It hasn't been quite so bad recently, but going into my third trimester and just the fatigue is starting to get to me. And again, it's something that I really hesitated to talk about because it is very personal, and also because I think we tend to not bring it up so much because pregnancy and having children is such an amazing, beautiful thing, which it is, by the way. Like I cannot stress that enough. I cannot stress just how awesome this whole experience has been. It has been the coolest thing I have ever done, the coolest thing that I have ever gone through. I mean, just to say that we are over the moon about him getting here soon is just a complete understatement. So it is a beautiful thing. It is a wonderful thing, but it is an incredibly difficult thing. It is a very hard thing. If you're one of those women, by the way, who just breezed through your pregnancy and never felt better, that is so awesome. Kudos for you. I am not. I cannot list myself in that category. And I think that that's okay, right? I think that that's okay to talk about. And I think that it's okay to be honest about, which is part of what this podcast is about, is opening up like that and being honest and talking about stuff that wouldn't otherwise maybe be talked about, and letting you guys in a little bit. If you have followed my work at all over the past few months, you may have noticed there was a time period, I want to say maybe around like Thanksgiving-ish of last year, maybe like Thanksgiving to Christmas, where I barely did any videos at all. I maybe did one a week, and they probably weren't my best. And a lot of that is because I was so sick. I mean, the first trimester for me was just, there were so many days where I couldn't get out of bed. I was incredibly ill for most of the day. Whoever invented the term morning sickness, by the way, is a complete and total liar, because a lot of times that's not how it goes. It's morning sickness, and it's afternoon sickness, and it's evening sickness, and it's middle of the night sickness. At least that's what it was for me. And having been through this experience, that's something I didn't know before. Nobody told me that before. That wasn't something anybody warned me about, and it wouldn't have changed my decision even if they had, but that's not something anybody really told me about or talked to me about. Since going through it, though, I have talked to so many friends and family who were like, yep, that's exactly the way that it was for me. And I really wish it were something that were talked about more, rather than something that I feel like a lot of women, we feel like we have to put a smile on our face and we have to make sure we look pretty and go about our lives as though nothing is wrong. So again, that is my long-winded way of saying that this has just been one of those days. It's been one of those days that's been really rough, and where I'm just looking forward to this part of the process being over and for us to actually have our son here. And it's been difficult to kind of get through the professional parts of my day. So all that to say, I'm here though, and really excited to be with you guys today. I did not want to miss today. I really didn't want to miss today, even if I feel like I'm not firing on all cylinders, because today is actually, it's equal pay day. If you haven't heard, equal pay day. And I think that that's something really important to talk about. I get excited to talk about this issue every single year because it's absolutely one of the most ridiculous things that the left comes up with. It is so incredibly stupid. It is so incredibly easy to debunk. But rather than just do that, I also wanted to talk about this gender wage gap, all right, which is what equal pay day is completely based upon. And I really wanted to start nailing down not only why it's false, because that part gets pretty obvious. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. that part gets pretty obvious. I wanted to talk about not only why it's false, but why the left continues to push it even though it's false. Because I don't think that it's just as simple as men don't or women don't make as much as men, this is a problem. I don't think that it's as simple as that. I don't think that it's even just a chance to come in like a big government savior. Even though I do think that. I think it's all part of a larger agenda here, and I think that it's just one way and one tool that they use to sort of, push a larger social agenda. So, first of all, let's get into equal pay day. If you haven't heard, that's supposedly today. It's based off the same notion as tax day, where it's that day that Americans have to work to in order to pay their taxes for the year, and then whatever you earn beyond that point is what you get to keep, right? It's sort of a way of showing just how much the government takes out of our paycheck. Well, equal pay day is kind of a play on that concept. It's the idea that women still make about 77 cents for every dollar that a man earns on average, and that this is the point in the year that women have to work to in order to start making as much as men. Or rather, that this is the point that women have to get to, and now we can start earning, and from now until the end of the year, that's how much we make as opposed to men. So that's kind of the basic concept. You will see this push. The left has a hashtag about it every single year. It's all over Twitter. And you see a lot of 2020 Democratic presidential contenders coming out, of course, women especially. You've got Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar. They've been harping about this all day. They go on CNN and MSNBC. And just this constant talking about how women are still not making as much as men. It's obviously sexism. It's obviously the patriarchy. And obviously the government has to come in and do something about it because that is their answer to everything, right? So first of all, what is equal pay day? The notion that women are still making so much less than men. The figure that I've actually seen this year is 80 cents. It was 77 cents, and I think that it's kind of dependent on which study they use, whether you're looking at Bureau of Labor Statistics or whether you're looking at census or whether you're looking at independent studies. So we'll just say 77 to 80 cents for every dollar that a man makes is supposedly what a woman makes, and clearly this is a bad thing. Clearly this is just the epitome of sexism, and something must be done. Because something always has to be done, because somebody's always being victimized by something here. So let's talk first of all about why this is total and complete bullcrap. And it doesn't take long to figure this out. So obviously you can tell that just simply saying women earn less than men is full of problems. It's full of problems. It doesn't take into account a slew of factors that might actually explain why some people make less than other people. That's not a huge concept. If you said, Brian makes less than Jerry, most people would go, okay, well, what do they do? I mean, does one of them have a PhD and the other one's got a high school diploma? What do they do? I mean, you would naturally start asking those questions. Somehow, the ability to connect those dots and common sense goes out the window when we talk about the gender wage gap, and everybody just kind of assumes, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Women are making less than men. That's horrible. And nobody thinks to ask, well, golly, could it be because of average education level? Could it be because of skill set? Could it be because of job choices? What could be a contributing factor to why that is? And is there a reasonable explanation for this? So to start this conversation off, I'm going to go ahead and use an example from my own life, right? Because again, we're talking about these in blanket terms. You're talking about a country of 320 plus million people. So let's narrow this down and I'll talk about my family specifically. I make significantly less than my husband. I'll just go ahead and throw that out there. I make significantly less than my husband. I don't make peanuts, and I do contribute a good bit to our family budget. And without it, we would be feeling that, okay? So it's not like I don't make anything, but I do make significantly less than him. Here's why. So my job, I have a bachelor's degree in English. I do not have a master's degree. It's something that I have thought about going back and getting. But really, to do what I do and in the career path that I have taken, a master's degree is not strictly necessary. It's not something that really would be worth the investment at this point. It would just kind of be a personal fulfillment thing. And if I get to that point, great. But right now, it hasn't seemed worth the money to go do. If I took a different path in my career and wanted to do something else, it might be worthwhile. But at the moment, I don't have one, and I'm okay with that. He does. He does have a master's degree because he's a naval officer. He's been in about 11 years. Obviously, there's a government mandated pay scale that he's on, but his job requires a lot more education and a lot more skill set in certain areas in demand than mine does. His job is actually much more demanding in many ways than mine is. I am privileged to be able to work from home. That is something that was a priority for me for family reasons, among others, and has become a priority for many people in today's society. But that's what I get to do. I get to work from home. I am a writer. I am an editor. I do videos. And I get to kind of make my own schedule and do a lot of that on my own time. He does not. He has had to go on deployments. He has gone to combat zones. He has had to learn very, very demanding skill sets in order to do his job. And it has required 2 degrees. It's probably going to end up requiring a 3rd at least. And so that's kind of, there's a disparity between what he does and what I do, what it takes to do his job and what it takes to do mine. There is a reason he gets paid more than I do. We both work 40 hours a week, give or take. And we both work full-time and we both have careers that we really love and enjoy. But there's a reason why our pay is different. And I'm okay with that, okay? So that's just kind of the setup for what I want to get into next, which is a little bit more of just kind of debunking this myth. Hang with me for 2 seconds, guys. I'm going to take a quick break. I will be right back after about 2 seconds. Hang with me and we're going to dissect this a little bit more. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered, talking about equal pay day today and the so-called gender wage gap, which apparently is supposed to make me feel extremely oppressed and victimized, but I don't. And here's why. You shouldn't either. Before the break, I gave a really quick example about my own life, the fact that my husband makes more than I do, and reasons why that is, and reasons why I'm okay with that, and I'm not stressing about that. So a couple of just really important facts to consider about this whole equal pay day, because for some reason people are still buying into this. I don't know why. It is not hard to figure out. It is not something that takes a lot of research to understand. It's very, very basic, and yet progressives apparently think that we're all just dumber than a sack of rocks because they're still pushing this narrative as a way to demonize the patriarchy and, of course, pave the way for big government to come in and save us all from our oppression, because it's all about our oppression. We're just victims all the time. It's constantly victims. So a couple of basic things about equal pay day. First of all, it's every single day in the United States, in case you didn't know. Why? Well, because it's illegal to pay women less than men for doing the same job at the same level just because they're women. I know that's a wacky notion, and the left doesn't like to talk about it, but it's actually been the law for over 50 years. It is called the Equal Pay Act of 1963. It amended the Fair Labor Standards, and it prohibits pay discrimination against employees based on their sex. So we already have that on the books. Already exists. If you think that you are being paid less than a man for doing the exact same job at the exact same level with all other factors being equal, you need to file a complaint and you need to sue. You can already do that. All right. So this is already the law. So that does not mean that if you took a blanket average of all women's salaries and compared it to men, that women don't make less, because that's absolutely true. They do. Here's why. It's not as simple as just saying, well, they make less. There are many, many factors that the left does not like to acknowledge because it's easier to just throw that blanket statement out. Here's an analysis, I guess, by Gallup, who's supposed to be impartial. They tend to kind of lean left, but we're going to assume that they're completely impartial here, because even they had to admit that the so-called gender wage gap is complete bullcrap. It's not based on gender discrimination. It's based on factors such as the number of hours worked. So on average, women tend to work fewer hours than men. It just is what it is. So according to their analysis, they note that twice as many women, 15%, work less than 40 hours a week compared to just 7% of men. So we actually tend to work fewer hours a week. When you get to the over 40 hours a week, that widens even more. 47% of men, so nearly half, work more than 40 hours a week compared to just 30% of women. So half of men are working more than 40 hours a week, whereas fewer than a third of women are doing the same. which obviously is going to contribute to a pay gap because now you're into things like overtime if you're a salaried employee, right? So the other factor, another major factor that tends to play here is, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, surprise, surprise, women tend to choose different jobs than men. Fancy that. Idea that women are different than men. Absolutely crazy, right? We don't like to talk about that. For example, the top 3 most common jobs for women are teachers, nurses, and secretaries. For men, it's truck drivers, followed by managers and supervisors. Now, that's not to say that teachers, nurses, and secretaries are any less than or not worth as much, as that their jobs aren't as important. But you have basic categories of jobs that pay more and jobs that pay less. All right, if you're going into the teaching field, it has been common knowledge for a long time that teachers are not going to make $1 million. They just aren't. And yet, women continue to choose teaching as one of the top 3 professions in their gender field. That's just what we tend to do. And that's okay. That's totally and completely okay. But we tend to choose different career fields. We also tend to have different education levels. We tend to have degrees in different things. There's been a really big push recently for girls to go more into STEM fields. I'm not knocking that. If you want to go into a STEM field, that's totally fine. But the push for that is to try to force this so-called gender wage gap to close by making women go into fields and get degrees that can compete on, I guess, a man's level, to compete with fields and degrees that they tend to have, that they naturally gravitate towards because of their genetic makeup, as opposed to women who don't as often go into some of those fields. Again, which is perfectly legitimate and perfectly okay. But we have to try to force this, right? Because we don't want to acknowledge that men or women are different unless it's, a convenient time to acknowledge that, and we can pit one or the other against each other according to the left. But because of that, those are some of the factors that really contribute to this so-called gender wage gap. It's complete and total crap. The other factor, and this is just, again, we're talking about basic common sense here, people. We're talking about things that don't take a long time to figure out. Women oftentimes tend to work fewer hours or tend to take longer leaves of absences because we have families and we end up staying home and taking care of our children. That is something that we innately want to do more often than men. Many women work. Many women put their kids in daycare. Many women have to put their kids in daycare, or a family member comes and watches the child, or a nanny, or whatever. I'm not saying that women don't work after having children, but on average, if someone's going to stay at home with the kids, it tends to be us. And it tends to be us not only because we have to, somebody has to, not everybody can afford childcare, but because we more often want to. And that is not a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing to acknowledge, and it's not a bad thing to say. All right, I know so many women personally who really, really struggled to go back to work after having a child, not because they didn't love their jobs, not because they weren't good at them, not because they didn't put a lot of time and effort into their education or their careers, because they did, but because when you have a child, that is where your heart goes. And more often than not, that is where you want to be. It's a situation that I'm looking at down the road in just a few short weeks here, is this idea that we're going to have our first child, and that is going to change everything completely. All right, I've spent a lot of years working on my career. I've gone to different countries building a resume. I have taken jobs that I didn't necessarily want. I have worked really long hours. I have done things that I did not necessarily want to do. I have worked for bosses I didn't want to work for. I have put a lot of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into my career. He's worth more. He is worth more. And that's okay. My family is worth more. And that's not to say that I'm going to completely step away from my job, because I don't feel that calling on my life. I don't feel like it necessarily has to be 100% one or the other. But it is okay to acknowledge that women stay home with their children, and that a lot of times they do it because they want to. That is okay. So, according to Forbes, and here's kind of the proof in the pudding here. According to Forbes, women in their early 20s are on average out-earning men. So women in their early 20s are out-earning men. It's not until you get past that age where you start getting into women getting married, women starting to have children. That's when the ratio kind of shifts, okay? That's when things start to go a little lopsided the other direction. So typically women On average, according to Forbes, they ask for an average of 2% more compensation than their male counterparts. They end up getting 7% more than men in their early 20s. It's not until later that that tends to shift. So, this obviously is not a gender issue. This is a life choice issue. This is a stage of life issue, okay? And choices that people make. So, all that to say, we're now talking about just very, very, very specific choices and differences between men and women that can start to account for this gender wage gap, right? So I want to try to put that into context a little bit, because then the question becomes, then what now, right? Why continue to push this if it's so easily explained? What's the agenda here? What's the angle here? And I think there are two, okay? I think that there are two. And the first one, obviously, I think is a big government push. This is kind of at a basic level, this is what the left does. They do it with gun violence, they do it with minimum wage, they do it with gender wage gap, they do it with, just pick an issue, and they tend to try to use it as a way to push a big government solution, right? We're all victims of something and the government has to come in and save us. So, it doesn't really matter that there's a reasonable explanation for this. It doesn't really matter that a lot of this is based on personal choices that people make. It has to be painted as a problem. The patriarchy is the problem. The government has to come in and fix this. So I think that that is angle number one. Okay, that's the most obvious one here. So this idea that enter the government now gets to come in, and lo and behold, they get to enact policies. They get to take over parts of the business sector. They get to start dictating what companies can and can't do. They get to have more power and control. That is ultimately the leftist agenda. So this is just another tool that they use to get to that point. There's a second thing, though. There is a second angle to this that I think is even more nefarious and even more dangerous for our society and for us as human beings. I'm going to talk about that right after the break, but I want you guys to stick with me because I have a theory. I have a theory about all of this, and I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. So hang with me, guys. I will be right back after this. 2 seconds. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. Thanks for sticking with me. Been talking about equal pay day today and the gender wage gap, which again is just a completely ridiculous notion and does not take a whole lot of brain power to figure out why it's total crap. But it is a talking point that the left continues to push every single year, and it's a harping point that they like to stick on. And again, it's not just that it's mentioned in passing; it's that it's a big social media campaign. It's something that multiple 2020 contenders have gone on to television today to talk about. So this is something that they are really, really pushing, okay? This idea that women make substantially less than men for the same work, which again is not true. It is illegal, has been for over 50 years. And there are many factors at play into why women tend to earn on average less than men. It's for different work, it's for different hours, it's for different education levels, it's for different jobs, lots of different things. But obviously the reason, the question here then is why? Why continue to push something that is so easy to poke holes in, that the data does not support, that even places like Gallup and basic economists are coming out and saying, this is not true, this is why. So I think, first of all, we talked earlier on before the break about the most obvious reason here, which is that if you present something as a problem, especially on a societal level, if you present oppression or discrimination as an issue on a societal level, then you get to come in with your solution, right? Then you get to come in with, as is often the case with the left, your big government solution to fix it. Well, what does that often entail? Well, it entails the government coming in and taking control of things they didn't otherwise have control over, right? So implementing new laws and policies, taking over different parts of the business sector, telling companies what they can and can't do. We see this with the minimum wage, right? That, supply and demand just gets completely tossed out the window, and you have to come in, and now the government is dictating to all these different companies what they can and can't make, or what they can and can't pay their employees, because you have people like Bernie Sanders saying, well, the CEO makes X amount and the bag boy makes blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, because one's the CEO and one is the bag boy. The bag boy can one day rise up to be the CEO if he works his tail off and does what he needs to do. But the CEO is naturally going to make more than the bag boy. However, none of that logic is taken into account, so the government then comes in and fixes this problem that doesn't actually exist in the first place, or isn't being fairly talked about and fairly represented to the public, but the government comes in with all of its solutions and we end up with a bungled mess because that's what the government does, right? It screws up everything that it touches. It'll do the same exact thing if leftists are given their way when it comes to the gender wage gap and all the different policies that they want to implement to try to fix something that doesn't actually exist. It's not an actual problem. So why? Okay, why? The first answer obviously is control, because that's what progressivism wants, right? That's what socialism wants. It wants big government control. It doesn't want personal liberty. It doesn't want personal freedom. It doesn't want capitalism. It wants big government control. There's a second issue though that I think is a little bit scarier, and I wanted to bring this up because this is where I think ultimately it comes down to. And I started thinking about this because I was reading a little bit today about this issue is presented different ways every single year, right? At one point, it was kind of just tossed out there as a women make less than men. Now, thanks to social media, thanks to places like PragerU, thanks to some more conservative websites or some economic websites, people have more information now, right? People are starting to go, yeah, but I've heard that that's not exactly why that is. So now progressives are having to come out and defend this argument and kind of take it to the next level. And I was reading a Vox article that really displays what I'm talking about today. It was written by an Anna North, published this morning, and it acknowledges in the onset that equal pay day, based on the notion that women make less than men, that notion is because of certain factors. It acknowledges that. It doesn't just throw that out there anymore. It acknowledges that there is a difference in number of hours worked, that there is a difference in choices that men and women make. The article is so you can look it up. It's called You've Heard That Women Make 80 Cents to Men's Dollar. It's much worse than that. It's much worse than that. Okay, so the headline itself sets you up for this is a dire situation. We need to figure this out. This is a catastrophe, right? Way bad. Way bad. So we need to figure this out. Throughout the article, which I'm just going to kind of summarize here, it talks about how women make less than men because of different factors, and then it gets to what they call the care chasm, all right? The care chasm. And it talks about how women are dropping out of the labor force at much higher rates than men in order to care for children or sick relatives, primarily children. Okay, some women may have to take a step back because they're caring for an ailing parent or sibling or whatever, but typically it's because you had a child, now you're staying at home, or at least you're cutting back your hours in order to care for your child. Many people do this because they want to. Other people do it because they can't afford daycare, which is ridiculously expensive in a lot of cases. But that is the reason that this Vox article acknowledges on the outset. It calls it the care chasm. So it sets it up as there's this disparity between men and women's pay because there's a disparity between men and women and who has to care for their children. It doesn't acknowledge anything about why women care for their children more often than men. Maybe some factors that could contribute to that, some biological factors, some factors like men and women are different. Of course, it doesn't want to acknowledge any of that. So it simply pits one gender against the other, says women get stuck caring with the kids, and here is where it leaves it. And this is where I think they give the game away. Last paragraph of this article states, and I'll quote, "Whatever the solutions are, though, Rose and Hartman's report is a reminder that when we think about policies to close the pay gap, we can't just look at what working men and women are making in a given year. We have to look at the men and women who aren't working, why they're not working, and how that affects their careers over the long term." Okay, so here's why I say that gives the game away. First of all, it starts on the premise that we need to implement policies to close the pay gap. All right, so going back to what I was talking about before, that the government has to come in and fix this, that this is a problem that now the government has to come in and they have to force this through policy, right? It can't just be something that we acknowledge exists in our society because of certain very understandable reasons and explanations, right? We can't just acknowledge men and women are different. They make different choices. Their pay might be a little bit different. No, we have to implement a policy at the government level to close the pay gap. So that goes ahead and admits what we talked about before, which is that this all comes down to government control. But it also paints the picture of men and women not working, and that women who don't work tend to work or tend to take a step back from work because they're caring for their children. And it automatically paints that in a negative light. Here's my question. Why? Why? Why is that a bad thing? I know we never want to talk about this because, we get into this idea of, some June Cleaver-esque picture where we're all these women are supposed to, be walking around in their little fit and flare dresses and their high heels with their pearls, and the man is supposed to come in and we're going to have a 4-course dinner laid out for him and one of those little I Love Lucy vacuums in our hand, and so that's automatically the picture that gets painted whenever anybody brings up the subject. Why is it a bad thing for women to stay home with their kids? Why is it a bad thing for women to want to stay home with their kids? I'm not saying that every woman does. I'm not saying that every woman should. I'm not saying that women can't work. I'm not going to completely set aside my career entirely because I don't feel like that's what I'm called to do when our son is born. Okay? But that doesn't mean that things aren't going to change for me. And it doesn't mean that it's bad if I get to that point and I want things to change. Why is that demonized? You're talking about policies to close the pay gap and acknowledging that men and women make different choices. A lot of that has to do with who's going to be the caregiver for their children. And you're saying we need to implement a policy to force that closed because that is a bad thing. What are you going to do? You're going to say men have to stay at home and care for their children as many days of the week? Are you going to say that women have to go back to work? What is a policy solution to that? Is question number one. What is the government going to come in and mandate? Okay, I know that you've got paid maternity leave and all these different questions, that are kind of incrementally trying to get to that point. But what is the big government solution to mandating that men and women have to be equal caregivers, cannot have any disparity, have to make the same choices? Because now you're questioning the choices that people make. You're questioning the personal decisions. You're questioning the education level they're getting, the career choice they're going into. And now you're questioning the family decisions that they're making about who's going to care for their children. And you're starting to paint targets on women's back who want to stay home and care for their children and demonize them as somehow less than or not contributing as much or contributing to this pay gap that is so oppressive to everybody. And this is the crux of the matter. And this is what I want to drill down to. I see that as a blatant attack on the family. And it's just another one because the left has attacked the family for eons, right? They do it through abortion. They do it through sex education. They do it through demonizing toxic masculinity. It's an attack on the family and those who hold the family in high regard and high esteem, who value it for what it is and for how it helps shape us as people. Because ultimately, a family is where you get your identity. I'm not saying that every family has to be perfect or every family has to be perfectly traditional, but the family is where you get your identity. The family is where you learn your values. The family is where you get the foundation for you and your worldview and how you live your life. And that is a threat to people who love big government. That is a threat to the idea of a socialist utopia, because under a socialist utopia, they get to tell you who you are. They get to tell you what to believe. They get to shape your worldview through the education system, through their policies. The family is a threat. And I see this as just another attack on the family and a way to break down the notion that a family is important, that a caregiver at home with a child is important, because it's much easier to throw them into an education system that's going to indoctrinate them, right? We don't want a mom being at home with her kids any more than we want a father being at home with their kids. So that's kind of the angle that I'm taking when I read something like that. I'm going to take one more really quick break. We're going to come back and wrap this up. Chew on that for a couple of seconds. I'll be right back after this. Hang with me, guys. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. Thank you for sticking with me. I am actually really kind of surprised and a little bit proud, I'm not going to lie, of making it this far. Wasn't sure how this podcast was going to go because like I said at the beginning, kind of a rough day at the office here. little bit of a rough pregnancy day. Kind of feel like I've been in a brain fog. So hopefully you guys got something out of this. Hopefully I actually made sense. And so make sure that you send me your questions and that we can kind of discuss this further, because I do think that it's important. I think as we move forward and we talk about these leftist policies, we talk about the myths that they perpetuate, whether it's on the topic of equal pay or the topic of abortion or the topic of gun control. I think it's really important not only to talk about the policy and to talk about kind of the myths that they push and why they're not factually correct. I think it's also important to talk about why they push it in the first place and what the ultimate agenda is here, what the ultimate goal is here, and what they want to do to you and to your life. Because again, I think when we start to understand this false victimization, when we start to understand this idea of pitting gender against one another, of pitting different people who earn different salaries against one another, of people who are on this level versus people who are on this level, I think ultimately what it comes down to is a sense of selfishness, a sense of entitlement, and a sense of envy. Okay, which oftentimes causes us to look at our life in comparison to everybody else's life and what they have, what they don't have, and progressivism thrives on that. All right, progressivism thrives on victimization and oppression and making you feel like you don't have what someone else has, or that your choices aren't legitimate, or that somehow you need to be saved from some boogeyman that's coming after you in one way or the other. So I think it's important to really drill down to the whys of this, okay, and what ultimately they're trying to do. Because if we can see what they're trying to do, and if we can kind of visualize the place that they're trying to take us, all right, where they're going to come in and they're going to make us all equal and they're going to save everybody, but then you kind of start looking at how that has turned out in history, you start to get a sense of, okay, this is why they're pushing this, and this is why I don't want that. So how do we push back? Okay, how do we bring truth? How do we shed light on that? And I think that this unequal pay day, I think we're starting to see a shift now from just simply talking about women making less to now we're acknowledging why women make less, and we're starting to demonize that, okay? Demonizing the idea that women stay home and have kids, or demonizing the fact that men and women are different and make different choices, which is not something that the left likes to acknowledge, that men and women are different, that they are created different, and that is a perfectly okay thing. So again, all that to say, kind of taking that angle, I think we're going to do so in the future when we talk about issues like this. Make sure you send me your questions. Make sure you send me your feedback and your comments. I appreciate you guys being here with me. Make sure you tune in every single Tuesday live on Facebook and YouTube at 9 p.m. Make sure you also share this on your own pages, because otherwise social media platforms will completely throttle our traffic and this won't get out. So it's up to you guys to make sure that you comment and you share and pass this around so that we can continue to grow our audience and also grow our kind of little discussion group that we have going on amongst ourselves here. So thank you guys again. I will see you back here next week, same time. Have a great rest of your week.